Welcome to EmpowerID 101. My name is Phil Geringer, one of the solution architects here at EmpowerID. I've created this series of short training videos to provide you with an administrator's understanding of EmpowerID. I have included videos that cover most aspects of EmpowerID, from basic concepts to complex configuration and everything in between. Each video has been designed to cover a specific topic or process, so feel free to come back often and refresh your understanding of a particular area that you're interested in. This video in the series will cover performing a basic installation of EmpowerID. So the goal for this particular video will be to demonstrate a clean installation of EmpowerID. We're going to be restoring the installation database, installing EmpowerID onto the application server, verifying the management console and web interface are operational, connecting to an inventory and Active Directory domain, creating and mapping basic business role and location structure, and turning on our inbox processing to provision the master person identities from the Active Directory accounts. Now, the environment we'll be working in is a virtualized environment today. Our EmpowerID server will be a Windows 2008 R2 server. The SQL is a Windows 2008 R2 server with SQL 2008 R2. The Active Directory is a 2008 domain with 3,000 users. All prerequisites have already been applied to the servers. We'll go over installing prerequisites and preparing the servers in a separate video presentation. All installation licensing files have been previously downloaded and staged to the servers for use. A debug view utility has been installed and configured for monitoring the process as we do our work. And I'll be using a domain admin account for ease of configuration and working with the system. So now, let's get on over to the server and we'll take a look at how our installation progresses. So this is our server environment. In this screen here, in this window, I have our EmpowerID installation files, which is our server installer, our database backup. I've got our license files that we'll be using, and then some other things in here that we may use if needed. I also have a SQL Server Management Studio window open where I'm going to go ahead and do the installation of the database. So basically, I'm going to come in here. I'm going to do a restore of our database. I'm going to name it EmpowerID. You can name the database anything you want. No, we don't care about that. I'm going to go find my source backup file. There's my 2013 source installation backup file. All right. Now, if I wanted to, I could distribute the files, the log and data files, to separate spindles. But in this case, in our lab environment here, I just got everything on one server, on one spindle. So I click OK, and that's going to start executing the restore of the database. Now, throughout our installation process in this video, I will pause the video because there's no reason to have to sit here and wait for 10 minutes for a particular piece to occur, like for instance restoring the backup here. But we'll notice that we're starting this particular install at right around 12:20, so we can see how long it takes overall. Okay, looks like our database has restored properly, so we'll go ahead and click OK there and refresh our databases. We notice that we have our EmpowerID database here. We're just going to take a quick look at the properties on it. So we'll notice that the database overall is 3.2 gig in size. Let's get 3 gig of data file, and the log file is just 20 right now, 20 meg. Now, when we do an initial installation of EmpowerID, the database initially is in simple recovery mode. And that's simply to prevent the logs growing very large as we're doing our initial inventory and configuration processes. Once we get done with our base configuration, then we'll go ahead and we'll set the recovery model to full. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and minimize that. Now that the database is installed onto the SQL Server, go ahead and go to our installation files here, and we'll run our server installer. Our server installer is going to utilize two basic installers. We have the Windows standard installer that will launch that basically manages the installation process. But once the files get put out to the drive and expanded, then our own installation processor will take over and complete the rest of the process. We'll see that here in a moment as the process continues. All right, here's the Windows installer taking over. Next, we'll accept the license agreement. Now, if you want, you can change the location of the program files if you have a separate drive, which is recommended. But for us, in our lab, we're just going to leave it on our C drive. So now we're going to give it the name of the SQL server. And the name of the database that we selected. And then we'll begin the install shield installation. So as any standard install shield process will do, it's going to go decompress the files and start its process. All right. The Windows installer is about to the point where it's going to go ahead and launch our own EmpowerID installer, which is what it's doing. And our installer checks for previous installation. We'll do any update things that needs to happen, and that will do its own extraction into our program files architecture. All right, so it's about done extracting the files. Now, once the files are done extracting, two things are going to happen. The first thing that's going to happen is the installer is going to wrap up its processes, going to register the product, going to set the icons and such, and then it will be completed. The other thing that will happen is our installer has launched what we call the local settings tool for the application, which will allow us to set the basic information for this particular server. All right, so we've completed the installer. Now here's our local settings tool. So in the local settings tool, we're going to do a number of server-specific configurations here. We're going to identify the server certificate that we're using for our federation processing. I'm going to click on that, and this is the one that I want to use. So that will register the certificate with the database. Then I'm going to put some basic information in here, such as the default web server notification URL. This will be the URL that's used when we send out email notifications. This will be the common DNS name that is used to communicate back to the web server to launch our workflows and such. Now you'll notice sso.empowerid.com. This is simply a common DNS name that I'm using for our particular server. The actual server name is eid.exchange.com, but this is just an alias that we're using for simplicity's sake. And then we need the SMTP server that it's going to use to relay email messages out through, and that is our Windows 2008 Exchange server. Actually, it's we need our from address. We'll apply that. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to import our license. So once the license key, so I'm going to go back out here to my source directory and grab my license key that will come with your installation package. I'm going to drop it into here. Then we're going to go out and find the license file to complete the license import. So now that's done. All right, the next thing we're going to do is go ahead and configure our IIS sites and application pool. All right, so this has brought up our configuration. For that, I'm going to go ahead and locate the web pages in our IIS system here, and we'll see where that is here. We go to our web server. This particular server has an IIS configuration with a simple default website. Right. If we wanted to, we could have other websites on here, and those other websites would then show up under here for us to tell it where we wanted to apply that particular site. So hit apply. Now what that's just done is it's gone out here to IIS. If we refresh this, it's created all of our websites, our web applications, and the corresponding application pools. But you'll notice there's no identity currently associated with the application pools. That's what this process down here is for. Going to go ahead and set our identities for our application pools. You'll notice here it's now set those identities for us. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to configure our Windows services. So we look over here in services right now on our server. We have no EmpowerID services currently installed. What we're going to do is we're going to select the worker role in the web role service, right click and tell it to install. Alright, so it has now installed the services, and if we refresh over here, we now have our services just set up as a local system. Next thing we'll do is we can go ahead and select both services at the same time, and we set the credentials. Alright, so that will set the credentials on our services. So now we're all ready to go and start up our services. Now, one of the utilities that I mentioned in the introduction here is Debug View. It's a very small sysinternals tool that basically allows us to view what's happening on the kernel of the system. All right, well, I'm completed here, so I'll go ahead and close down the local settings tool. And we'll go back here to our services. We're going to start up our web role service, which is the first service that needs to be started here. All right, so when we start the web role service, you'll notice what's happening in the background here. Basically, this is just showing us all of the commands that are passing across the kernel of the server. And we use this to monitor the process that is happening and just track the status of the system as it loads its information. Now, this is a normal installation, first-time installation error that's going to occur. Don't worry about it. It's just looking for something that doesn't exist yet because we haven't installed it. All right. So what we're waiting on here after we've started that workflow service is we're waiting for the workflow service to go ahead and get itself settled onto the server, and then to start downloading and registering our assemblies into the global assembly cache on the server. So that's what I'm waiting for here on this particular screen. I'm waiting for that to start. And then we want to monitor that and make sure that it gets all of the DLLs completed. You'll notice here it's saying it's installing. Let me stop the scrolling here. It's actually pulling the files out of the database Those DLLs are assemblies, and then it is installing them into the global assembly cache of the system. So this may take a few minutes, so I'm going to go ahead and pause as we wait for this to continue and to get completed. Okay, we're back here now. And we'll notice down here at the bottom of our screen, we see loading server objects, loading package assembly references is done. That's what I was looking for, to make sure that everything had properly gone through and done what it was supposed to do. So we can go ahead and reduce that down. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and start the worker role service so that it can come up and register itself. We'll take a look here as it starts up. We should see some things happen. And notice, there we go, that it's registering its daemons, starting some of its processes up, and looking to see if there's any jobs that it needs to go ahead and start processing. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and stop that. Once I know that it's properly working, there's nothing really for it to do yet because we haven't configured anything in the system. So I'm going to go ahead and stop that service as we're doing our work here to do our initial configuration. Alrighty. So now, one of the things we'll do is let's go check real quick in our system in the Windows assemblies. And now we should see a number of assemblies, anything that starts with an EF here. Those are going to be all of our assemblies that we use. So those are all properly in there, and we can not worry about those now. All right, so now we've actually got the software installed, and it's been about 25 minutes since we started the whole process. Let's go ahead and close that window. Let's go ahead and launch from our .NET Factory location here, our management console. And we start out launching the management console just so that we can verify all of our connectivity is properly functioning. So one of the things we want to do when we initially launch EmpowerID for the very first time is click on the login help. This is simply going to do a quick communications check to make sure that all the communications channels and pathways are open. And okay, we see, all right. This error is simply telling me that I didn't wait long enough to have everything up and going. So if that typically happens, that's one of the things we can simply go in here and do an IIS reset real quick. Just to make sure IIS is got everything started and has what it needs to have. And that it's properly refreshed all of its stuff. And then we'll just do a quick restart of the web role service as well. And then give it a chance to get itself started up here. All right. Now we'll try this again here. As everything starts up, it can be slow sometimes. This is what I wanted to see. Basically what that login helper does is it takes authentication out of the picture. It simply attempts to launch one of our anonymous workflows, which will basically verify that all of our connectivity and communications are properly functioning throughout the system. So we'll wait for this workflow, and if you see this screen come up, everything's good. So we have good functioning communication. So that's all I wanted to see for now with this. So I'll close that. And now the other thing I want to verify is that our web service, or our web pages, are properly functioning. So I'll bring up a web browser. I've got this set for the default page, so I'm going to go ahead and stop that real quick so you can see what we're doing here. So the default web page for EmpowerID is going to be an SSL secured site, so it's HTTPS, then your fully qualified server name, or whatever DNS alias you have, / EmpowerID v5. So we'll go ahead and browse to that particular site. We'll wait for the site to completely compile. Okay, so our main starting page will come up here and allow us to log in for the first time. I'll click on login. By default, the identity provider that will be configured out of the box is simply going to be the EmpowerID identity provider using its own forms authentication. Once again, keep in mind the first time through, things are getting all settled in and compiled, so it may take just a minute or two to complete some of these processes. All right, so we're going to log in as the default user, EmpowerID admin. The default password is in the documentation. So go ahead and log in. Now, the first time we log into EmpowerID, it's going to request that we complete our self-service password enrollment for the self-service process. And so it's going to come up with our password identification questions. And so we can just simply start answering some of these here. And you can either hide or unhide your answers. I'll leave it up to your imagination to figure out what I put in there. All right, so we're going to submit. And that's going to initially enroll this particular user for self-service. All right. Now that that's gone through, we can go ahead and re-log in here. So log back in as our EmpowerID administrator. And we're in the system. Everything is functioning properly. We can manage things and we can navigate the system and see what we need to see. All right, so that verifies that our base installation is properly configured. So now let's go ahead and we will connect to our Active Directory domain. Now that's done through the management console. So we're going to go ahead and log in to our management console to do that process. Alrighty. This is a normal error that we receive the very first time someone launches the management console. So we're going to go to our configuration manager, user directories, account stores. We're going to create a connection to an Active Directory account store. Now all of these processes that I'm doing here will be covered in detail in other videos that we'll do. But just for purposes of this installation, I'm just going to fly right on through and just briefly describe it as we go through. My forest name, my NetBIOS domain name, what I'm doing here is I'm configuring the connection information for the account that I want to use to connect to that domain. I'm going to select the domain that's in that forest that I want to manage and click OK. This is going out and it's doing a initial load of the domain controllers and the OUs that are in that particular domain. So we can see our directory servers. This is the domain controller that is in our lab here. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and configure a few things here. Just turn a couple things on and off. All right, so basically what I've done is I have enabled inventory. I turned off automatic person provisioning on inventory because I want to use a separate process to do that. And then I've turned on the enabling of simple username search for pass-through authentication. We have our LDAP agent server that we're going to use, which is our EmpowerID server with our agents on it. We have our connection account, we have the domain controller and monitoring, and we are all set to go. So now that we have the basic configuration set here, and we have most of the stuff turned off still while we do our initial inventory. Now, in order to get the inventory started, I'm going to go back out to our server and I'm going to start our worker role service. The worker role service is the actual service that's going to manage the the running of that inventory automated process. All right, so the worker role service has started. If we look in our debug view here, we should see it's starting. Oh, looks like it started its inventory. So I can just, and this is the reason for debug view. I'm just taking a look and it's going through and it's starting its inventory, looking at the users, the groups, all that type of thing. So now that I know it's properly started, if I come back here into my account store and I do a refresh on the data, it's going to show that it has initially started the inventory. Now this, we've got 3,000 accounts in our particular Active Directory here. So it may take a little bit of time, a few minutes to get going, and it's going to do it in chunks of 1,000 at a time. So as we refresh the data periodically here, we'll see 1,000 accounts showed up here. Continue to refresh the data, and it will cycle through those. So while it's going through its inventory, let's go ahead and set up some of our basic roles and locations that we want to use for EmpowerID. We'll do that through our web console here. All right, well, the first thing I want to show you is that we have our Active Directory. I'll show you where our user accounts are at. So in our Active Directory here, very simple Active Directory, we've got some OUs, some offices here, Sydney, London, Kyoto, Dallas, and Columbus. We have our users broken out into those various user OUs. So we see them here. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and go into our web interface here now. So I'll call up our web. I'm going to log in as EmpowerID admin. Now what I want to do is I want to manage my business roles and locations. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create some business roles and locations. Create my location structure here. I'm going to create a location structure that corresponds to what I've got in Active Directory, just for simplicity's sake. Just creating some basic locations here. You can create locations through the management console or through the web interface here. This is the parent location we want that to be. You notice we already have London, so this is going into the all business locations. So I want them to be parent nodes themselves. Just top level nodes for our various locations. Create a few more here. I'll do one for Sydney. And then one for Dallas. Okay, so that's our basic location structure. Let's go back home here. Now if we go into our management console here, let's take a look at how we're doing on our account store. So we've gotten some mailboxes inventoried here as well so far. So we'll go ahead and we're going to open up a new tab here. And in our role location manager here, we can see the locations we just created and our basic roles. Just have a simple role established right now. There's our location structure. So now we're going to open up our mapper. Because what we need to do is we need to associate these locations with the user locations that they belong to. So I'm going to drag and drop Sydney over onto the user's container in Sydney. And we'll drop London over onto the user's container in London. And Kyoto over here to Kyoto. And Dallas to Dallas users. And then Columbus to the Columbus users. I notice on here it says press F4 to refresh the mappings. If we press F4, we simply see a graphical representation of that. All right, so we're going to take a little break here while we wait for our inventory to complete. And so I'm just going to go ahead and pause the recording and we'll come back in a little while. All right, so we're back. And with our refreshed data, we can see that inventory has processed properly. We have 3,434 accounts, 1,468 mailboxes, 206 groups, 6 computers, and 28 OUs in our Active Directory. All right, so that's basically all we needed to do in here. So now let's go out and see what that has given us. We'll reduce down this. Okay, now we have our session logout. Yes, I want to stay logged in. Let's go ahead and refresh that and make sure it still knows that I'm good. All right, so now that we have inventoried Active Directory, let's go take a look at groups. Just to get a quick visual of what we have in the system. All right, so we're going to go, here's all of our groups. These are the groups that exist in Active Directory. You see the first 30 of 206. I can look at these groups, this particular group that comes up. I can see any group members that are in that group. There we are. I can remove group members from that group. So even though I have just now done the inventory and just now gotten Active Directory introduced to EmpowerID, I can already edit and impact these groups. I can auto accept join leave requests. I can change the login name of the group. I could put description in. I could change the notes. So I can edit this group. And likewise, if we do a find, we'll be able to find our accounts. So if I look for counts, here's our user accounts in the system. There they are. I can bring up any of these accounts. And I have access to groups. I can take actions against the accounts. I can simply edit the account through an edit one screen. And I have complete control and visibility into my Active Directory accounts at this point in time. And mailbox settings for that account, if he's got a mailbox associated with him. And then personal information. All right. So now that we know all of that is working fine, next thing we need to do is we need to get people into the system. So for that, we're going to come back into EmpowerID here. And we're going to go to our servers and roles. And we're going to make sure that we have the role selected to process permanent workflows. We see that it is selected, so it will process if we turn it on. I'm going to expand these. I'm going to go to our permanent workflows. Go to our account inbox. So our account inbox permanent workflow. Now, I'm not going to set any complex business rules for who I bring into the system. I'm just going to activate it so that it begins processing our accounts. All right, so now we see that that's true. So in a short period of time here, the system will begin processing those accounts that we'll be able to see through our change tracking. If I go to our new account inbox, I can see all of the accounts out here that are currently waiting to be processed as to be evaluated to be processed as person objects in the system. If we go out to our debug view here, we can see what it's doing. Let's stop the scroll here. So it's just doing some more inventory processing here. Let's see if it's actually had a chance to process anything yet. Nope, hasn't processed anything yet, and that's fine. We'll just give it a few minutes to begin processing our account inbox as we just turned it on. All right, so let's see here. Let's go to the search here, see if it's done new processing yet. When we go down here, we'll take a look at it and see if anything has been processed. Ah, there we go. We have some people being provisioned into the system. So what the system is doing here is, if you remember from one of our previous videos, we are creating meta directory master person identities in the system. And we're linking those identities to the account that is associated with them. So if we just let the system go here a little bit longer, and we'll get all of them in there. And if we take a look at expanding this out a little bit more, we can see how many. You can kind of keep tabs on how many it's been processing. So it's gotten 2,000 processed so far, so it's coming along very nicely. If we look at our account store as well, at our Active Directory domain, we'll now see another thing in here where total people, the person count is now going up because the system is provisioning people associated with the accounts in this particular domain. Now if we go back to our web interface, we go to people now. And we give it just a little bit of time to know who all it has. It hasn't finished its processing yet, so we'll just give it a little bit of time. Okay, so I believe that has completed its processing. Yep. We'll go back and look at people. We see our people. We bring up one of our people, William Abel here. We can see that he has a user account in the Exchange Active Directory domain. He has a standard employee role in London, because that's where his account is, so he is in that particular location now. A self-service user management role, and he has a few search tags associated with him. So if we take a look in our management console, and we go back here to our person viewer in our management console, just to see a different view of our data. Come over here and we look at Columbus. We want to see anyone who is an employee in Columbus. There we go. These are the people that are employees in the Columbus office. Likewise, if we wanted to see who's in Dallas, we notice that the people have been placed into their appropriate location based on the mappings from the Active Directory into EmpowerID. And at this point in time, roughly an hour or so after we started our implementation or installation, we're connected to an Active Directory. We have full access to all of the Active Directory components, and we have master person objects that are in our system and are linked to those Active Directory accounts. And we are ready and available to begin managing our enterprise. So in summary, with proper preparation, installation of EmpowerID can be a very straightforward and smooth process. Connectivity to Active Directory can be achieved through simple parameter configuration, like we saw, and the basic infrastructure setup can be accomplished through simple GUI processes and workflows. So we didn't have a whole lot. We didn't have to go in and write any code. You didn't see me write any coding at all in the system. I didn't have to bring up any specialized programs. I simply, through the interfaces given to us in the EmpowerID platform, we can configure our environment for our basic processing. So thanks for watching this EmpowerID 101 video on basic installation. Come back again later for other videos in the series. Thanks.